Well, at last, finally, we get some concrete, clear statements from Pope Leo XIV on the traditional Latin Mass. And I'm going to break it down with you today. It has to do with Pope Leo's understanding of polarization and ideology with respect to the traditional Latin Mass and the Novus Ordo Mass, which he calls the Vatican II Mass, which I think is very important for us to note. And I'm going to go through the entire section of the Crux interview with Pope Leo XIV with respect to liturgy. Now, there's a whole bunch here, all right? Here's the interview over at Crux. You can go to crux.org. Let me make sure, because I want you guys to go get it. Cruxnow.com. My bad. And as you can see, Pope Leo speaks to Crux's Elise on Allen about LGLMNOP issues and the liturgy. I'm surprised they released this interview. It's serious. You've heard me say for the last 3 months, wait and see, be charitable, give Pope Leo charity, pray your rosary, pray decades, pray rosaries for him. I prayed a rosary and prayed for his intentions last night. Be patient, be charitable. And I think we're coming to the moment where we can discuss it. What's hopeful, what's not so hopeful, his personality, his temperament, and I think you'll see today when we do the analysis, his vocabulary. Person's vocabulary very much reveals the lens by which people perceive things, understand things. I would encourage you, in the business world, in the communication world, look at vocabulary and look at repeat vocab words, because that's often a clue. It's a hint into how a person thinks. Do it to me too. Do an analysis on me. I want to begin. It's been a very difficult 3 weeks. We had the horrible tragedy in Minneapolis at the Catholic school. Then we had the horrible tragedy with Irina and the train in Charlotte. Nation mourned. And then we had the horrible tragedy with Charlie Kirk. And it's been raw. It's been difficult. I've been trying to counsel y'all and counsel myself to break out of this circle, this loop, this cycle of anger and sorrow and wrath and sadness. All of those emotions are in Scripture. All those emotions are in the book of Psalms, and I encourage you to pray the Psalms. But we have to draw close to Jesus under the title of Prince of Peace and Our Lady of Peace. We have to remain, by the grace of God, our intellect and our will must reign over our passions and our emotions. And I will tell you, it's very difficult. I am struggling with this. I haven't been streaming as much. I've told family and I've told friends, why aren't you doing your show as much? And I just said, as I think about these difficult topics, and it's also difficult. We got this big interview with Pope Leo. We had the James Martin pilgrimage in the Vatican. It's just nonstop. As I try to rein in my passions, my thoughts, my responses, and I do a live show. I'm live with you right now. I'm live. Live is hard, all right? Go live for an hour. It's very difficult. I know myself enough to know that if I go live and I go down certain trails and I reveal that which is raw, right? I could say things that I may not want to say. So I've just been reading the Book of Wisdom, one of the Deuterocanonical books. I've been praying for wisdom. I've been praying for charity and prudence and a tame tongue. And, just to be honest, look at the interview. You know, we got Pope Leo talking about the L's and the M's and the B's and the N's and the T's and the Q's. And we got him talking about the liturgy. Today, I'm sticking to the liturgy. All right. Another day we will do that because it's much more for me scary to look at the words of Pope Leo and what might be happening there. All right. Especially after the last 3 weeks. I'm just being totally honest with you live right now. So I'm going to go something I feel a little bit more comfortable with, and that is the liturgy. And I think I can break this down for you simply in a way that you can understand and a way that you can prepare yourself to calculate for the future, especially as we're doing a wait and see for 90 days, 100 days. We're getting past that now. Pope Leo is getting more comfortable speaking to the public, making his appointments. And I want to challenge you to continue to be prudent, to be calm, to be rational. And there's just a lot going on in the world. So make sure you're praying your rosary every day. Be on the team. Read your Bible, read sacred scripture, and buckle up. All right, here we go. This is the interview Crux released with Elise and Alan. It's been a little bit difficult to do analysis on it. The audio is not great on it. People have already discussed that. They released it, as far as I can find, I can't find the full. So I'm listening to, they've broken it into like 5-minute clips, 4-minute clips. I'm having to assemble it in order. I'm wondering if there's pieces missing between clips. It's very difficult for me doing analysis to fully understand what's being presented here. So today I'm just focusing on what we have, or what I have, of Pope Leo on the liturgy. So I'm going to scroll down here to that spot. Whoops. Here it is, right about there. And, I went into that segue because I want to pray with you. I want to pray the Hail Mary. I want to pray for Charlie Kirk. I want to pray for his widow, his wife, poor Erica, their 2 children, who I'm sure have no idea what's going on right now. I believe they're 1 in 3 or 1 in 4. For the violence that we're seeing in our country, for the division, there's a lot of sadness, there's a lot of anger, and the only way out is Jesus Christ. All right, you got Christ or you got chaos. Jesus Christ or chaos. And there's a spectrum in there, and the closer you get to Christ, the more you get away from chaos, and you get to order, you get to logos, you get to rationality, you get to sanctity, you get to the common good. All right, that's where we need to be. That's why I wrote the recent book, Christian Patriot. And I want to thank everyone. The book was, from what we can put together, the number 4 best-selling hardback nonfiction in America. Thanks to y'all. Y'all went out and got it, and I just want to thank everyone for supporting it. We should have been on the New York Times bestseller list. They excluded us, and I'll just leave it at that. It's been a couple weeks that the New York Times are not real excited about, and I believe it's a politically motivated decision on their part. But regardless, it's been a huge success, and we're moving the Overton window to talk about Christian, specifically Catholic, political philosophy, to be a Christian patriot. Christ first. So I think the best way to do that is we're going to pray together. I want to begin us with an Our Father. We'll pray it in Latin, and then we'll jump into the interview. Oremus, nomine Patris et Filii et Spiritus Sancti. Amen. Pater noster, qui es in caeli, sanctificetur nomen tuum, adveniat regnum tuum, fiat voluntas tua, sicut in cielo et in terra. Panem nostrum quotidianum da nobis hodie, et dimitte nobis debita nostra, sicut et nos dimittimus debitoribus nostris, et ne nos inducas in tentationem, sed libera nos a malo. Amen. Our Lady of Guadalupe, pray for us. St. Joseph, pray for us. St. Robert Bellarmine, pray for us. Lord, have mercy. Nomine Patris et Filii et Spiritus Sancti. Amen. All right, here's the interview, and we're going to go. This is Pope Leo XIV. The question is, regarding the study group on liturgy, what is being studied? How much of the reason for establishing this was related to divisions surrounding the traditional Latin Mass, for example, or issues such as the new Amazonian Rite? All right, so a perfect question, just softball teed up. Pope Leo can wind up and just crush it. And here he goes. This is very clear from Pope Leo. He says, my understanding of what the group came out of is primarily from issues that have to do with the enculturation of the liturgy, how to continue the process of making the liturgy more meaningful within a different culture, within a specific culture, in a specific place at any given time. I think that was the primary issue. Then he says, he switches. All right, that was kind of referring to the Amazonian. Then he says, there is another issue. I'm going to highlight it here for all of y'all. Y'all see that? Pope Leo says, there is another issue, which is also another hot button issue. Okay, I want to pause here. This is good. Pope Leo realizes that the traditional Latin Mass is a hot button issue. Probably the two hottest potatoes in his hands right now are the LMNOP people issues and the traditional Latin Mass issues. All right. Those are the two, I believe, hot button issues. So for Pope Leo to use the term, very American term, by the way, hot button issue, that at least reveals to us that he understands that this is not something as a pope you just sit on and contemplate for 7 years. It's more pressing. So he says, which is also another hot button issue, which I have already received a number of requests and letters about. All right, so, I think we saw the president of Poland asked Pope Leo about the traditional Latin Mass. Cardinal Burke has. Many people have. Those of us in the Catholic circles in America who attend the traditional Latin Mass, we've been talking about it. We've been making podcasts. We've been very careful to say, hey, let's give him a chance. Let's wait and see. And then now we're getting to see, right? This is the first lift of the veil for us, in his own words. The question about people always say the Latin Mass, well, you can say Mass in Latin right now. If it's the Vatican II rite, there's no problem. Okay, so that's not really the issue. We all know that. It's none of this discussion or debate. I know some people, in particular, people who are new to discussion, they think the discussion is about Latin, but it's actually about the prayers. It's about the rubrics. It's about the things the priest prays and says and does and doesn't do, the differences between the traditional Latin Mass and the Novus Ordo Mass. And for those of you that are new to the conversation, I should have said this earlier, traditional Latin Mass is the Mass that was generally received. It is celebrated in Latin from around 600 to 1965 to 1969. And then there was a new version of the Mass in Latin, Novus Ordo, new order of the Mass, Novus Ordo Missae, that was finished in 1969, promulgated throughout the world, 1970. And that's the discussion. So he says, yeah, you can say Mass in Latin as long as it's the Vatican II Mass, but that's not really the issue, and we all know that. And he grants that. He says, obviously, between the Tridentine Mass and the Vatican II Mass, the Mass of Paul VI, I'm not sure where that's going to go. It's obviously very complicated. All right, some key things here is he uses Tridentine Mass instead of traditional Latin Mass, which is how most of us speak of it. He uses the word Tridentine Mass. And then he uses the word Vatican II Mass. This is the dialectic of Pope Leo. We have the Tridentine Mass and we have the Vatican II Mass. If you like the traditional Latin Mass, I think, for me, I find this a little bit problematic. It's creating a dialectic. I think the cards are stacked in that dialectic, if that's the way you're thinking about it. All right. And then he says, I'm not sure where that's going to go. It's obviously very complicated. That means I'm going to take him at his word. He doesn't have a plan. He says, if you want Latin, you can have Latin. Novus Ordo. But what is the plan moving forward? He's revealing here he does not have a plan. He says, I'm not sure where that's going to go. It's obviously very complicated. I think we take him at his words. He's not telling people, I need you to write a motu proprio for me to sign. That's not where he's going. Now, the next part, I think, reveals a lot more about how Pope Leo thinks about liturgy. All right. Before I do that, though, I want to honor today's sponsor. And the sponsor is Fabric by Gerber Life. And I've been delaying all ads in honor of Charlie Kirk. Just wanted to give time for him. Yeah, I'll just leave it at that. But Fabric by Gerber Life. You know, you need term life insurance policy. A friend of mine today just said, how do you think, Charlie Kirk's wife's going to make it? And I was like, she's going to be fine, turning points around her. And I was like, they also probably had an amazing life insurance policy for her. And that's true for all of us, not the day or the hour. And when we first had our first child born 23 years ago, the priest, he said, do you have insurance? We're like, why do we need insurance? We're 24 years old. And he goes, you never know. Now that you have a child, you got to start thinking about grown-up things. And so Fabric by Gerber Life, today's sponsor, is term life insurance that you can get done today. It's made for busy parents like you, all online, on your schedule, right from your couch. It can be done in under 10 minutes with no health exam required. So if you have children, especially if you're young and healthy, lock in those low rates now. You can do it quickly. You owe it to your children. You owe it to your family. Fabric offers flexible, high-quality policies that fit your family and your budget. For example, $1 million in coverage for less than $1 a day. To me, this is a simple calculation. It's something that you need to do. So join thousands of parents who trust Fabric to help their family. Apply today in just a few minutes at meetfabric.com/Taylor. It's in the show notes. Meet is spelled out MEET. Meetfabric.com/Taylor. Policies issued by Western Southern Life Assurance Company, not available in certain states. Prices subject to underwriting and health questions. There's also a link in the show notes below. All right. Back to the subject at hand. Liturgy. Now, before I go into this part, as you can see on the screen, I've already prepared for you the spectrum. Where are we on the spectrum? This is the liturgy spectrum. Because Pope Leo talks about ideology and polarization with regard to the traditional Latin Mass. And so I thought to myself, instead of just dismissing that, instead of writing that off and saying, oh, there's no ideology, we're getting back into this dialectic that the Latin Mass is a flag, it's a symbol, it's a public display of dissent to the church. I was like, okay. Pope Leo believes there's ideology. He believes there's polarization. And I said, okay, if I were to grant that as a Thomist, what would be the ideologies and what would be the polarization today, 2025, on liturgy? In particular, the Novus Ordo Mass and the traditional Latin Mass. So I'm going to use the acronyms NOM, Novus Ordo Mass, and TLM, Traditional Latin Mass. And I came up with 8 categories, and you can see them on the screen. Number 4 is kind of in the middle, and then number 1 is at like maybe the far left, and number 8's at the far right. Okay, so when we talk about ideologies or polarization, I think probably the most extreme view here, before we get back to Pope Leo, is God doesn't want the Latin Mass, the traditional Latin Mass. Do people really believe this? Yes, I've met them. I've met these people. They believe that if Jesus Christ appeared in the room right now and said, ask me anything, and I said, do do you want the traditional Latin Mass offered? They would believe Jesus would be like, I'm so glad you asked that. No. The Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, we don't want the Latin Mass. In fact, we've been waiting for 1,000 years for y'all to get rid of that. We want the Novus Ordo. The triune God desires the Novus Ordo. Do people on earth believe that as an ideology? Yes, I've met them. But I think that's the most extreme position, where they believe that the Novus Ordo Mass issued by Paul VI in 1970 is the fullness. It's the greatest development. It's the greatest Eucharistic liturgy development since the Last Supper. There are people that believe that, yes. There are people who honestly tell you what is closer to what Jesus intended, the liturgy of St. John Chrysostom or the Novus Ordo. And they'll say the Novus Ordo. The Mass of 1970 is the greatest Eucharistic rite in the history of the church. Okay, so that's one end, that's one ideology. And then we start moving kind of to the right here. All right, number two. Okay, and the whole reason I'm doing this is because Pope Leo said that there is ideology, and he said there is polarization. And just being in this space, I was like, I'm going to take time and try to draft out, if you believe there's polarization, what is the polarization? And we can do some analysis on it. And maybe I'm wrong. Let me know. I'm going to go to live chat today and take your comments. Number two, the Novus Ordo Mass is the Vatican II Mass and the only Mass. All right, so I think this is the position, as far as I can tell, by Pope Francis. All right. Vatican II happened. After Vatican II, they reformed the liturgy. That is, in a way of saying, God's will. This liturgy is God's will for humankind, for the church, for the Catholic Church. And that's what we're doing. There's no, Pope Francis was like, there's no ordinary form and extraordinary form, like Pope Benedict said. He said there is the Roman Rite, and the Roman Rite is the Novus Ordo. All right, so that is a position. I think it's very popular. I think a lot of bishops believe in that position. All right, that's number two. Now, number three is getting a little bit more moderate. We're moving towards the middle. There are people who will say, well, I don't think God doesn't want the Latin Mass, and I don't think that the Novus Ordo Mass is the end-all, be-all, only expression of the Roman Rite. But I just think that the Novus Ordo is better than the traditional Latin Mass. All right, so this might be, say, well, I'm not going to name names, all right, because I don't want to mischaracterize people. But there are a lot of people in sort of the, I would say general diocesan structures, people who are good people, goodwill. They just say, well, I like Mass in Spanish, or I like Mass in English. I like holding hands at the Our Father. I like that we can receive communion hands. I like being a lay Eucharistic minister. They're not saying, I think the traditional Latin Mass is bad or that God didn't like it. But I think it is, they would say, I think it is honestly better, and it's better for a modern world. I think that's a pretty popular position. I would say in America, the majority of the clergy probably wouldn't say one, maybe some would say two, but I think the majority in the United States of America, Catholic clergy would say number three. They're not necessarily against the TLM. They know that some people are really into it. But they believe that at the end of the day, the Novus Ordo is better. I think, if you ask maybe, I don't know, Father Mike Schmitz or Bishop Barron, they would probably say, if you said, does God not want the TLM? They would be like, no, TLM is fine if people want TLM. But they would say, at the end of the day, we think the Novus Ordo is better. It's better suited for ministry, for outreach, for people. So I think number three is probably the majority issue in the United States of America. Now we kind of get number four is, I was like, well, what is the parity? What's the middle position? And that is Novus Ordo and TLM are equal. All right. This is sort of Pope Benedict XVI. This is Cardinal Sarah. They're both good. The traditional Latin Mass is our patrimony. It's our inheritance. The Novus Ordo, corrected or improved things that needed to be improved, but they're right there. And we need to have mutual enrichment of one another. A lot of people who hold this position kind of feel like since they're on par, they'll sort of just morph and absorb into each other, and they'll just be maybe something even better. But they're just right there. Both should be celebrated. Both should be tolerated. Both should be expressed. Equal. Now we're going to move towards the right, if we're going to talk about a spectrum from left to right. And if you're just coming in with me, the reason I'm doing this is because Pope Leo in his recent interview stated that there's polarization. And so what I did is I created what I thought would be the polarization, and there's ideology. So obviously he believes that, and I'm not trying to make a mockery of that or dismiss that in any way. As a matter of fact, for me to actually create this spectrum was very helpful. I don't think I've ever really just got out a sheet of paper and jotted these ideas out, but I think it probably captures what most people think on the spectrum. So number 5 is the TLM is preferred over the Novus Ordo. This is the Latin Mass is my preference position. Now, a lot of trads, hard right trads, we'll get into them in a minute, they make fun of this. They're like, oh, you like the traditional Latin Mass because you like Gregorian chant, or you like Baroque vestments or Baroque architecture. You like it for aesthetics, or you just really like Latin, right? And it's not something that comes from theology or tradition. It's something that appeals to you and that you prefer it, right? And you honestly could be number 4 and number 5 at the same time. You could say Novus Ordo and traditional Latin Mass are equal. I go to both, right? I flow in and out of each, but my preference is traditional Latin Mass. It's like, I love ribeyes. I'll eat one medium or medium rare, but I prefer medium rare. That's my preference. Better flavor profile. But I'll take either one because it's a steak and I like steak. All right, that's number 5. Now we move down to number 6. The traditional Latin Mass is better for various reasons. All right, this is kind of like number 3 on the other side of the spectrum, right here, number 3. All right. They would say the traditional Latin Mass is better because the offertory prayers are better. There is a 9-fold Kyrie instead of a 6-fold Kyrie. The penitential rite is better. They would also add in there, kneeling for communion is better than standing for communion. Receiving communion on the tongue is better than receiving communion on the hand. Not having Eucharistic ministers is better than having Eucharistic ministers, etc. So they're going to actually make the case that traditional Latin Mass is better, just like people up here at number 3 are going to argue that the Novus Ordo is better than the traditional Latin Mass. Then we get to number 7, all right? And that is, and 7 and 8 kind of go together, but you hear different versions of them. Number 7 is the traditional Latin Mass is good, the Novus Ordo Mass is evil. It's bad. Do not go to it. And then another variation of that is number 8, and this is your sede vacantis. And again, 7 and 8 sometimes go together. Traditional Latin Mass is valid. The Novus Ordo Mass is totally invalid. It's not even a real Mass. All right, so that's kind of your polar end opposite spectrum. And 7 and 8, I differentiated them because there are some people who say the traditional Latin Mass is good, the Novus Ordo is bad, is maybe they wouldn't say evil, but they would say bad, but still valid. But then number 8 is just like the Novus Ordo isn't even valid. All right. So is this an honest spectrum here? And did I miss any steps, any features? So I think if you're going to say that the debate on liturgy in 2025 is polarized, I really do think that this is probably an accurate snapshot of the playing field. All right, with all that being said, I'm now going to go back into Pope Leo's discussion. Before I do, we have another sponsor today. I'm going to honor them as well, and that is Liver Health Formula. And consistently, especially as you get over the age of 35 and your 40s, sometimes you have that, and even younger people now I've talked to, they have this feeling like, I can't get going in the morning. I feel exhausted. I have 5-6 cups of coffee. I'm weighed down. I struggle throughout the day. And the culprit may be not just not having enough sleep, but it might be a sluggish and overworked liver. And the reality is our livers in 2025 are under extreme attack. We have environmental toxins, GMOs, microplastics, fluoride, so many things that are coming into our body, and our liver is that filter system. And it takes a serious toll. And over 100 million Americans now suffer from an overworked and sluggish liver, according to the American Liver Foundation. That's 1 in every 3 of you watching. Your liver is weighed down. And so I want to encourage you to do what I do, and that is get the Liver Health Formula to improve your energy. It combines 11 powerful, clinically proven natural ingredients to detoxify and rejuvenate your liver at the cellular level, so you experience more energy and an optimized metabolism. So there's a special offer. You can see it on the screen for my audience, 35% off for the Liver Health Formula. Use discount code Taylor. You'll get 35% off. Visit purehealthresearch.com and use discount code Taylor, Taylor, at checkout. That's purehealthresearch.com, discount code Taylor. You can also use the QR code on the screen or the link in the show notes. All right. That's the spectrum. Now we're going to go back with that in mind and look at what Pope Leo XIV has to say about the polarization in the church. And I'm starting. Okay, so he stopped here by saying, obviously, it's very complicated. I'm not sure where that's going to go. And then he says 2 more paragraphs. These are absolutely critical. So I'm going to start here. Again, you can go to cruxnow.com and see it yourself. He says, I do know that part of the issue, unfortunately, has become, again, part of a process of polarization. He says in this context, polarization or polarized 3 times. It's really his most popular term. All right, so he understands the issue of the Latin Mass and the liturgy from the perspective of polarization. He says, people have used the liturgy as an excuse for advancing other topics. Let me stop there. This was something also that I saw in Pope Francis. And I remember speaking to a bishop, probably in the early 2010s. That bishop said, my concern about the traditional Latin Mass is that it is a banner that is used in the church for rebellion. All right. This is, I think, how some bishops, and maybe Pope Leo as well. All right. What is the language again? People have used the liturgy as an excuse for advancing other topics. So the idea is there's people in the church, they have other topics, and they take the traditional Latin Mass and they cover it, and then they use that as a Trojan horse to bring those things into Catholicism. All right. So at this point, we aren't even talking about liturgy. We're now talking about liturgy. Get this, folks. You guys thought, I'm the guy who wrote this in this Taylor Marshall, the guy who wrote. You thought he was the expert on infiltration. We are now dealing with an infiltration from another perspective, in which they think the traditional Latin Mass is used as an infiltration device to bring other ideas into the conversation in the church. And if you think about things from the point of view of synodality and having conversations, let me highlight this again here. If you think about things in terms of ideas and synodality, right here It's become a political tool, and that's very unfortunate. People have used the liturgy as an excuse for advancing other topics. I got so excited right there, my voice squeaked. This is a key insight into Pope Leo. I think it's also a key insight into Pope Francis, into what many bishops believe. Instead of ridiculing it, let's look at it. Let's study it. If you thought that the traditional Latin Mass was a vehicle or a Trojan horse that people use to disguise other topics or as a political tool to infiltrate the church, wouldn't you too be on guard against the traditional Latin Mass? You would be. You would think, wait, the traditional Latin, like think about, for some reason, you're at war and you keep losing supplies. You wake up, hey, we're missing half the ammo. Our food supply has been cut in half. What's going on? How is the enemy getting in here? And you realize, that they're using some covert way, tunnels or, guys who stealthily come in and remove things and take it away. And you're like, how are they doing? Oh, that's how they're doing it. Right? You're going to attack those tunnels, those ways that they're taking away from you. Pope Leo, baby Pope Francis, he's not with us anymore, and a lot of bishops think that the traditional Latin Mass is a mechanism, he actually uses the word, political tool, to bring in dangerous political ideas in the church. That's a really big moment. The fact that Pope Leo said that, and he said it in public, and he said it in an interview, is a big revelation. And I think it's good for Catholics like myself and perhaps Catholics like yourself who are very much concerned about the traditional Latin Mass. If that is the case, that's actually wonderful. Because I think thousands and thousands of Catholics who like the traditional Latin Mass, none of them that I know are using the traditional Latin Mass as a political tool. They're not trying to advance ideas, as he says here. People have used the liturgy as an excuse for advancing other topics. It's become a political tool, and that's very unfortunate. This is something very easy to dispel. He says, I think sometimes they say abuse of the liturgy from what we call the Vatican II Mass was not helpful for people who were looking for deeper experience of prayer or contact with the mystery of faith that they seem to find in the celebration of the Tridentine Mass. Again, we've become polarized, so that instead of being able to say, well, if we celebrate the Vatican II liturgy in a proper way, do you really find that much difference between this experience and that experience? And here, my friends, I believe, is the perspective and way forward for Pope Leo XIV, whether you agree with him or not. I believe that rhetorical question by Pope Leo XIV reveals to us that the proper way forward is to celebrate what he calls Vatican II liturgy in a proper way. And if you go back to his very first Mass as Pope, and you go back to, I went to, I believe, 3 of them, his audiences, his Angelus prayers, his blessings in Latin, a certain kind of decorum, an elevated decorum that we did not see as with Pope Francis. I honestly believe, based on what we're seeing here and based on what we've seen in the last 100 days with Pope Leo, his way forward is celebrate the Vatican II liturgy in the proper way, and everyone will come back. Let me repeat that. I believe Pope Leo XIV is not the idea of Pope Ben XVI, where he's like, okay, we're going to have the ordinary form, the extraordinary form, Novus Ordo, traditional Latin Mass. Everybody, there's your options. Be Catholic, live your life, become a saint. There it is. Freedom. This indicates, and I think the liturgical behavior and stance of Pope Leo XIV is I as Pope, by demonstrating this and by encouraging this in the future, we will celebrate what he calls the Vatican II liturgy. And again, he's using Tridentine Mass and Vatican II Mass. That's the dialectic. We're going to celebrate Vatican II Mass, and we're going to do it in such a beautiful way, and we're going to do it in the proper way that he says, here's his rhetorical question. Do you really find that much difference between this experience and that experience? He's going to say, traditional Catholic, go to the FSSP, go to Mass there, 1962 Missal. Go to Institute of Christ the King, 1962 Missal. All right. Now come to my Mass, Vatican II Mass. We'll use Latin. It'll be reverent. And then he's going to ask them the question. Here's his quote, straight out of the interview right here. This line right here. Come on, highlighter. He says, do you really find that much difference between this experience and that experience? That is the approach of Pope Leo XIV to the Mass. We have another paragraph, but I want to ask you in the live chat. All of you have been to, I'm sure, Reverend Novus Ordo, and many of you have been in the traditional Latin Mass. Do you really find that much difference between this experience and that experience? And I'll be honest and I'll say, I do. I'm a Gen X man. I'm married. I have 8 children. I've been raising my 8 children in the Catholic Church. I really do find a difference between this experience and that experience. And I don't think it has anything to do with hostility, animosity, has nothing to do with polemics. I really do, honestly. And Holy Father, Pope Leo XIV, if you're watching this, I love you. I submit to you. But I honestly do believe, and I'm not trying to bring in political ideology or use the liturgy to advance other ideas. I really do believe in the center of my heart that the traditional Latin Mass has brought me closer to Jesus. I believe it's brought our marriage closer to Christ, and I believe it's brought our children closer to Christ. And I do believe that liturgical experience is very powerful. And that's why I'm humbly asking for us to experience that with more freedom and with less restriction. And I think if Pope Leo is looking at it from the point of view, just in this paragraph here, because we have to understand. All right, we're doing what do we do? Accompaniment, right? We're talking, we're discussing, we're dialoguing, we're synodalating right now. If the concern is that the Tridentine liturgy or the traditional Latin Mass is an excuse for advancing other topics, or that it's there as a political tool, or that if we could just get the Vatican II Mass celebrated properly, it would all be the same experience. If those are all the conversations, that right there is, I think, a very fruitful conversation. I think you get, 50 to 100 people who are vocal and part of the traditional Latin Mass community in the world. And I think you bring them to Rome, and I think this conversation is had in a very cordial, loving, filial mode. And we do talk about, is the traditional Latin Mass advancing other topics? Is it a political tool? What is our experience as Catholics going to Novus Ordo Mass, Reverent Novus Ordo, Charismatic Novus Ordo, Elemento Pino, all these things, traditional Latin Mass, Institute of Christ the King. Let's talk about SSPX. Let's bring SSPX to the table. Let's talk about that. Let's have lay people. Let's have mothers. Let's have fathers. Let's have priests. Let's have nuns. Let's all come and talk about this. Because if these are the issues, I think we could probably work through these issues. Last paragraph, and then I'm going to go to your comments and your questions. Pope Leo says, I have not had the chance to really sit down with a group of people who are advocating for the Tridentine rite. Okay, so the previous paragraph shows his concerns, and then he says, I haven't been able to do this yet. And if you take anything away from this show, or if anyone in the Vatican or in Rome is watching this or aware of this, we are saying we would love to sit down. We love you. We're your children. We love the Catholic Church. We don't want schism. We don't want division. We want there to be saints. Yes, let's talk about this. And let's talk about these concerns in the paragraph above. Instead of, someone like Cardinal Supich going and telling people in the Vatican, this is what trads are saying and doing, let's actually sit down and meet face to face. He says there's an opportunity coming up soon, and I'm sure there will be occasions for that. But that is an issue that I think also, maybe with synodality, we have to sit down and talk about. Yes, I think we're willing to come to the synodality table and talk about it. It's become the kind of issue that's so polarized that people aren't willing to listen to one another oftentimes. I've heard bishops. Now, here's the part that I find a little concerning. He says, I've heard bishops talk to me. They've talked to me about that, where they say, we've invited them to this and that, and they just won't even hear it. They don't even want to talk about it. That's a problem in itself. Let me tell you, Your Holiness Pope Leo, I'm not like that. I think most people are not like that. If our bishops say, we would like to talk to you about your experience with the traditional Latin Mass. Why do you want the traditional Latin Mass? Who are you? What are your beliefs? I think we would gladly come to the table, as they say. Imagine asking pivotal people, lay people or clerical in the Fraternity of St. Peter, or, asking, Michael Matt, or even people in the Society of St. Pius X, hey, we want to understand why you like the traditional Latin Mass. Why do you like the Tridentine Mass? What are your concerns about the Vatican II liturgy? Why do you want your infants baptized in the older rite instead of the newer rite? Can you explain that to us? I think there are thousands and thousands of people who prayerfully will come forward and kiss the Pope's ring and say, Holy Father, here is my experience. And we talk so much about, we can't offend, the LGBTQ community. And, we have to bend over backwards and make sure they're always welcome. And we can't say one thing that would maybe turn someone away, and they wouldn't have that moment to reach out to Jesus and receive salvation. And yet there are hundreds and thousands of people who have had their parishes destroyed, their priests sent away, entire communities fractured, weddings that have to be changed, venues changed, dates changed, all over an ideology about liturgy that restricts and prevents the traditional Latin Mass. And I think that story needs to be told. I would be happy to come and sit down at the table and discuss these things as a loyal son of the church, as someone of goodwill, as someone seeking the common good of the church. Let us discuss it. And I don't want Pope Leo, where he says, I've heard bishops tell me they've talked to me about that, and we've invited them to this and that, and they won't hear it. They don't even want to talk about it. I don't know, man. I know a lot of traditional Catholics, that's all they want to talk about, if given the opportunity to talk to their bishops. I find that odd. And this is kind of that situation where Pope Francis said, I consulted with the bishops, and they're very concerned about the Latin Mass. No good. And so I had to restrict it, Traditionalist Custodes. And then we saw the document brought to light by Diane Montagna, which we assume is true and has a protocol number on it, and it's very positive about the Latin Mass. So there's two stories being told here. One story is traditional Latin Mass is using the Mass as a political tool. It's a cover to bring in ideas into the church. Bishops are reaching out to traditional Latin Mass people, and they won't hear it. They won't come. They're resisting discussion. And then there's the world that I live in and the people I know. And we really want to work with the Pope and the bishops. And we're willing to share our experience and what it means to be a Catholic, and our marriages and our children and our vocations and our priests and our parish communities. And then there's traditional expressions that we have in our parish communities that haven't been experienced in maybe the Novus Ordo community. I'm thinking like Ember Days, Septuagesima, certain saints' days that aren't emphasized, that we are experiencing. We're keeping those traditions alive, and that's a big benefit to us too. We'd like to talk about that as well. All right, coming to an end here. He said that's a problem in itself, and it means we're into ideology now. We're no longer into the experience of church communion. That's one of the issues on the agenda. So based on everything here, I'm going to say that Pope Leo has a concern that this is not a liturgical discussion, that this is actually a political discussion that has to do with polarization and ideology. All right, this is a new moment, okay? The chessboard is now clear. All right, the knights are here, the bishops are here, right? A few pawns have been taken off the table. We're looking at the board now, and I'm sitting here and I'm saying, oh, the strategy, the understanding on the other side of the board is that this is a political tool. This is polarization. This is nasty people. This is using liturgy to advance other topics. That this is not, on that side of the board, they do not believe this is a liturgical discussion. On my side of the board, I do believe it is a liturgical discussion. It's a different game now. And so Pope Leo signs off on, at least on this part of the interview. He said, that's a problem in itself. It means we're into ideology now. We're no longer into the experience of church communion. That's one of the issues on the agenda. If, and I'll close with this before we go to live chat, if some kind of meeting happens, they must invite cool, calm, collected trads who come and share their, and we got to listen to the terms here, their experience of church communion, ecclesiastical communion. Being a sede vacantist is not what they're interested in. They don't want to hear that. It's not being in communion. They are looking at this not from the point of view of, like, let's say I'm sitting there. So Taylor, we printed out, we have a binder for you. You know, thanks for wearing your lanyard with a logo on it. It says Taylor Marr. We print out a binder here. We have the Vatican II offertory prayers, and we have the traditional Latin Mass offertory prayers. We just wanted to read those aloud as a group in a circle and have everybody explain what those mean to them and why one is more important than the other. 1962 Mass or 1970 Mass. So let's go ahead and start here. Michael, Matt, will you read the first offertory prayer from the 1962 Missal, and then we'll just go around in a circle and we'll have a discussion. That is not what they are interested in. I would love to have that and have like Father Ripperger there and we talk about the offertory prayers. They are coming to the table thinking, are you guys political operatives? Is this a political tool? Are you trying to rupture ecclesiastical communion, church communion? That's their conversation. That's their chessboard. All right, I'm going to go to comments and questions. Y'all keep it chill. Much love to you. And here we go. Super chat from Tom Partlow. Thank you very much. Mark S. says, having difficulty coping with Charlie Kirk's passing, would you be able to discuss the concept of free will versus God's divine providence? I don't have an 8-hour show right now, so I cannot do that. Both are true. God is totally sovereign. His divine providence oversees all things and is all ordered to the greater good. Also true is that humans have free will. This is a mystery. It has been wrestled with in the Old Testament, in the book of Job. It's St. Paul wrestles with it in Romans 8, 9, 10, 11. Augustine spends a lot of time on predestination and God's providence and sovereignty. So does Thomas Aquinas. So does Bonaventure. So does Scotus. It is a mystery, all right? And I would say probably the best mind on it, I think the most balanced is Thomas Aquinas, in particular regarding predestination. But no, I can't, unfortunately, even in the context of Charlie Kirk, I cannot do a proper treatment of that here. But thank you for the super chat. Oh, and also in the live chat, I want to hear your perspective on the liturgy spectrum. All right. I think it's important to understand the liturgy perspective in the church. But as I said in the second part of today's show, the conversation is not entirely about liturgy. And I think that's a huge breakthrough. All right. I think traditionalists, this is a huge moment in this interview to realize that as much as we love to discuss liturgy and Holy Week and changes before 1955 and after 1955, and should we have octaves for Epiphany or not have octaves for Epiphany, and all these things that are interesting, those who want to restrict the traditional Latin Mass or have concerns, this is not where they are. This is not the discussion. I think it's a big insight. The thing that bothers me the most about it is the dialectic of Tridentine Mass, referring to the Council of Trent, 1500s, and Vatican II Mass, 1965. I think using those, we were talking about under Benedict XVI, ordinary form, extraordinary form. It's kind of like they're right there together. It's kind of like number 4. Novus Ordo TLM equal, right? Now, the new dialectic is Tridentine and Vatican II. Ooh, man, do we really want to go council versus council? I don't like that as much. It's conciliar versus conciliar. That's a dialectic that I think it could actually polarize more. So I am kind of concerned about if that is a real shift there. Conciliar, one conciliar versus another conciliar. That's not a dialectic in the church. We should have all councils, right, build upon one another. You can't just like take councils out and replace with councils. So I do find that a little bit concerning. Denver 206 says, spectrum is good, but you're missing one to the left. The people who think TLM is holding back the church from embracing liberal values from LMNOPQ. No, I think that's number one, Denver. I think that's number one. The people in number one on the liturgy spectrum, which is God doesn't want the Latin Mass, they are the same people who believe that Jesus Christ has been on his throne in heaven. Hopefully they believe that. And he's been patiently just sitting there like, with his thumbs on the altar. When is the Pope? When are we going to get a Pope who gets the priest turn around, facing the people, speaking in the vernacular language, and bringing in everyone who's gay? All right. The people who believe that are number one. All right. Jesus has been sitting up there for centuries waiting for the advent of Pope Francis. Like, why don't they elect the right people? Yet another medieval papacy. And they're just in heaven waiting and waiting and waiting. And then all of a sudden, Pope Benedict resigns. This is it. This is the moment, right? If you had just one moment, what's the Eminem line? Right? What's the Eminem line? 8 Mile line? I don't know it. I'm not into rap. I'm not into Eminem, but I know he's got that. If you had just one chance to go for it, to grab it, would you do it? Right? It's that one moment. Finally, it's like, we're going to let in all the L's and all the B's and all the T's and all the Q's. And we're going to change the Mass and we're going to make them face the other people. It's going to be in the vernacular. And all of heaven's like, yeah, let's go. That's number one. That's number one. God doesn't want the Latin Mass. He doesn't want all that rigidity. He wants everybody to be chill and rainbowed out. Rainbow apparel. Let's go. That's number one. I think that's the most extreme position. But there are people who believe, number one, that God doesn't want Latin Mass. He doesn't want any of that stuff that they think of as medieval. Sweet Mystical Rose says, having 7 children, half in the Novus Ordo and half in the Latin Mass. Half my children are weak Catholics, while half my children attend the Latin Mass, have a stronger faith. Okay, Sweet Mystical Rose, this is a wonderful perspective, and it's something we, quote unquote, bring to the table. All right? Sweet Mystical Rose, beautiful name, by the way, she's not here saying, hey, I'm going to use the Latin Mass to infiltrate the Catholic Church, bring in political tools, political agendas, and polarize the church and create division in the ecclesiastical communion, which is kind of things that we're hearing in the interview. Sweet Mystical Rose, I got 7 kids. The kids who were raised Novus Ordo and the kids who were raised traditional Latin Mass and the ones raised in the traditional Latin Mass have a stronger faith. Pope Leo needs to hear that. Thank you for that comment. All right, let's sit down and have the conversation. Joseph says there should be a category for the ever-changing liturgy based on synodality. Yeah, I mean, that might be number one. Whoa, what happened? Look at this. I just blew up the spectrum on the screen. Sometimes that happens. I clicked the wrong thing. Just blew up the spectrum. Are you on the spectrum? Where are you on? I want to know, where are you on the spectrum? And don't write a number, because that's too complicated. Type it out. I want to know where you're at. If you're number 5, right, TLM is my preference. If you're number 2, say Vatican II Mass is the only Mass. I want to hear your thoughts on it. This is a long one right here. Damien. Dang, bro, wrote a paragraph. Writing a book on here. He says, exactly. Yet there is so much ignorance among these in the Novus Ordo that they generally think the only issue traditionalists have is the language. Ignorance is the biggest problem, even amongst Catholics today. They don't know the faith. They aren't catechized. They know little or nothing about the church pre-Vatican II. However, at the same time, ideally, Latin should be the liturgical language. It's the universal language of the church. Yeah, a lot of people, I would say, people who have never been to a Latin Mass, and you say, I go to the Latin Mass, they think it's the same exact Novus Ordo Mass they attend, but instead of being in Spanish or English or Vietnamese, they think it is in the ancient Roman language. And they're like, why would you go to that? And they often say, do you speak Latin? Right? Now, I know Latin, right? But that's not the reason we go to it. And it can be hard for people to understand. It's very similar to the question, well, doesn't the priest pray with his back towards you? That's weird. Why do y'all do that? Right? That's their perception. There's a whole theology of ad orientem and praying to the east, and we're all praying together, and the sacrifice is offered to the Father, and Christ faced, to the west when he was crucified, according to St. John of Damascus. And there's all this theology there, but for a person, kind of just a pedestrian level of liturgy, they're like, why does the priest have his back to you when he's praying for you? Weird. And you're like, okay, let's go. It's a little bit more difficult. Lou 23 says, as a cradle Novus Ordo Catholic, I consider discovering the traditional Latin Mass as young adult one of the principal events of my life, like finding my long lost home. Truly huge differences for this guy plus whole family. This is what we, like a tidal wave, we must bring to Rome. We must say, we're not here for ideology. We're not here for polarization. We're here in a world that is secular and drenched in pornography and degeneracy and drugs and sexual identity. It's crashing upon us, and we have found that the traditional Latin Mass and those communities and those liturgies is what is feeding us and keeping us alive and protecting our children. Imagine if there were 100,000 people saying what Leo 23 said to Pope Leo XIV. He'd be like, you know what? We've been misunderstanding this debate. The way forward for young people, for families, the way forward is the traditional Latin Mass. Now we see that. We either didn't see it because we didn't want to see it. We were too bought in, sunk cost theory with the Novus Ordo, or we were misinformed by people who were telling us this is about politicalization. This is politicizing agendas. Now we see, we've read Leo 23 and thousands of other people. This is a pivotal moment in people's life. This is when they go deeper as disciples of Jesus Christ. Let's bring this whole thing back. Christopher Hooter says, Dr. Marshall, what about the reform of the liturgy, which isn't explicitly one of your 8 liturgical spectrums offered? Thank you. I think it is number 4. I think it falls into number 4. And I think the problem, reform of the reform was huge when I became a Catholic 19 years ago. That was hot. That was the cool thing. People were like, traditional Latin Mass, kind of weird, kind of medieval. I don't know. There's no English, no Spanish. It's all Latin. People were like, if we could just get the Novus Ordo to look and feel more like the traditional Latin Mass, and we could have the amazing 3-year lectionary. Everybody loves that 3-year lectionary. I'm a 1-year lectionary guy, but the 3-year lectionary is so awesome. If we just do that, and we would have the best thing ever. But the problem is, well, let me tell you what happened in the meantime. Summorum Pontificum came out. Pope Benedict gave the ordinary form and the extraordinary form. And what we saw is in many places, the ordinary form was improved. You had unicorn, right? But on the other hand, you saw that people just naturally started gravitating to the extraordinary form, the traditional Latin Mass, right? When given the option, there was pressure to make the Novus Ordo more reverent. But what happened is people just went to the traditional Latin Mass. So in a sense, the reform of the reform it wasn't, I think it was happening naturally a little bit, but it wasn't as big a deal. People were just like, A or B? A, I'll go to A. And then I think under Pope Francis, with COVID and shutting down churches, and a lot of Latin Mass places didn't shut down. So that was a big siren. That was a big alert that people started going to the Latin Mass. But then with Traditionalist Custodes, people are just like, throw up their hands. They're like, reform of the reform. I just got to find a Latin Mass. This is crazy. So I think 19 years ago, that was a big deal. There's no grassroots movement for that. It's interesting that maybe if you read between the lines, that's what Pope Leo wants to do, but it's kind of like that moment is sort of past, unless he thinks he can resurrect it. Good question, though. James Reeves, this past Sunday at the traditional Latin Mass, diocesan Mass, the young priest actually mentioned hell and heaven in his homily. Why aren't they discussed more? A lot of priests don't believe in hell. Don't believe in hell. And I think that's another thing that we need to say in our traditional Latin Mass communities. There is an emphasis on preaching and biblical exegesis and explaining the parables of Christ and the teachings of Christ that we have experienced at traditional Latin Masses that we don't experience all the time at Novus Ordo Masses. And I think that has to do with the way priests are trained in seminary. But that's a different discussion. But good point, James. Super chat from Matt Rusthoven. I think he's tried something to do is explain the Mass that I don't understand. Can't read it. Oh, here's another one. Maybe this is it. I think trade news to explain reverence comes from an aligning to Christ's passion, not just reverence of language or music. Yes, it is so much more than language or music, though language and music is very important. All right, so just saying something's more important than something else, doesn't mean that the things less important are irrelevant. They're very relevant. And aligning to Christ's passion is number one. It is primary. And I think the experience of myself and of my family is when we go to the traditional Latin Mass, the emphasis is not on shaking hands. The emphasis is not on the community, like being a community, like, hey, Paul, how was your golf game? The emphasis is not on that. The emphasis is not even really on, it's not on liturgical dance. The emphasis is not on how funny or interesting the priest is. The emphasis is on the consecration of the body and blood of Jesus Christ. It is obvious when you attend the Latin Mass, whether you go low Mass, a sung Mass, a solemn high Mass, a pontifical high Mass, the emphasis is on the consecration, even more so than receiving communion. And if that's the case, then that blesses myself, my marriage, and my children. Because we, by the liturgy, we are being Sunday after Sunday, or day by day, we are being conformed to the image and likeness of Jesus Christ as a sacrifice to the Father. And I think that is what's powerful. It's not necessarily the Latin or the Gregorian chant or the beautiful vestments or the altar rail or the vaulted ceiling or whatever it is. It is that emphasis, that primary feature that stands out. And that is what transforms people. And that's why there's so many millions of people who are attracted to the traditional Latin Mass. This is going to be my last super chat, guys, because we're over time. Naruto 1597 says, I hold more of a 6.5 view. I don't think the Novus Ordo is evil, but it favors heresy, as Archbishop Lefebvre said. I'm not there. I don't think, objectively speaking, it favors heresy. But I'm a 6. I'm a 6 is where I'm at. All right, there's one more super chat. This is the last one. Beth Jarzombek says, I am Gen X, raised in the Novus Ordo, but now believe the TLM is superior. I am curious as to what a Vatican II Mass would look like. Vatican II Mass is the Novus Ordo, Beth. That's when Pope Leo says Vatican II Mass, he's referring to Novus Ordo. The Missal of 1970 and then the revisions since then. So I think Beth's experience parallels my experience. And it's kind of like, I was going to use a tool analogy. I was going to also use a sports analogy, but maybe I'll stick with the tool analogy. I know this is Beth. I presume Beth is a lady, young lady. So I was like, maybe I shouldn't use tool analogy, but y'all know about tools, right? There are all kinds of tools in your tool bag. And my wife's calling me, so I better get going, guys. Mrs. Marshall's calling me. It's time to go. I've gone long. I've enjoyed today's show, by the way. You use different tools. You use different brands. You use different shapes. They have different handles, different angles. And if you're working on engines or you're doing woodworking, over time you realize that the way the tools work the wood or the way the handles on those wrenches or that ratchet set is preferred. It's better. And over time it becomes more and more convincing. Again, it's not necessarily a preference. That's number 5, what you prefer. It's number 6, right? It's better. It's better. That doesn't mean that those tools are junk, they're invalid, they're bogus, right? And I think what the older clergy who are so enamored by Vatican II in the Novus Ordo, and I think also what Pope Leo needs is we got to say, hey, here I am working on this engine. It's called my family. Work on this engine, and then the traditional Latin Mass, traditional liturgy. Look how this works right here. All right, look how I need to do this, and look at it, and this is how it helps us as a family. This is how it helps us. And you go, oh, wow, I've never seen anyone work on an engine right here from this angle like that. And I see how these traditional Latin liturgy tools speak to that situation in 2025. That's the opportunity. That's today's lesson. I want you to pray your rosary every day. I want you to go check out a Latin Mass. If you've never been to a traditional Latin Mass, go find one and go 4 times. Don't say, I'm going over there, this is it, and I'll be. Go over there, go 4 times, and then just reflect on what you've experienced. All right? All right. Well, thanks for everybody for the great comments. This was a good show today. I love you guys. Y'all are so smart. Well, my wife is calling me. I got to go. I got to go. If you didn't get Christian Patriot, get a copy. Go to Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Catholic Bookstore, Christian Patriot, 12 Ways to Create One Nation Under God. Let's start the movement. Let's renew the movement. And until next time, remember our Lord Jesus Christ is you're the light of the world and the salt of the earth. So go out there and be salty. God bless. Godspeed. Thanks, everybody, for being here. We'll see you soon.